happening here. So I'll be speaking on the Islamic fundamentalism in South Asia, just going a little back and forth. The story so far is that with regard to South Asia, much prior to 1920s, we see a bit of it coming from through the invaders who came to India, and in one other form, they were also imposed component of it, and they got this type of support that was required by the regimes themselves. But after that one, I think the rise to the modern day, what we see as the idea of jihad, or the ideas that were put up in the form of, let's say, fundamentalism, because fundamentalism being a project of the West, we're returning to the fundamentals. From there to putting up their own ways of looking at it, it started off in 1924 with the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate, where again, the British played their own role to see to it that the Al-Sauds could come up and an alternate power system there, because Ottomans held, in the name of religion, a very vast territory which they wanted to the British wanted the clutches to be removed, and then they wanted Al-Sauds to rise to see to it that they would take over some regions and then the British would have control over. So with the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924, the phase that we see between 24 to 47 had its own impact here. We had our nationalist leaders fighting for saving the Caliphate. That was on the one hand. Suddenly there was a movement that came in, and on top of it, within the Indian national movement, we see a break. In 1906, we saw the Muslim League coming in, and then subsequently the same Muslim League getting its own identity, trying to consolidate itself, and subsequently succeeding in having a country of its own based on communal lines, in the sense based on religion. That's a first of a kind in the whole of South Asia, where we see a state of Pakistan taking or emerging. But the period between 24 to 47 was a time which also reflected on the struggle that Islam went through, and the internal struggles it was trying to put up. There were too many issues that had to be dealt with. The First World War, the Second World War again had devastating effect, though they were not directly involved. But unfortunately, they all had to participate in one other way. The second phase is between 1947 to 89. Here where we see identity politics coming into the picture. Suddenly, across the spectrum, with the creation of Israel, the Arab nationalism becomes very important, the Muslim Brotherhood playing its own role. But then there was issue between the leaders who agreed on Arab nationalism, or the leaders who agreed on Muslim Brotherhood. They did not agree with other forms of it. Newer leaders had emerged by then. So there were issues of non-Arab states trying to get back to the fold and trying to become modern. On the other hand, the Arab states were going backwards because of the creation of Israel in 1948. Again, it gave rise for some sort of a consolidation where they could still use the modern terminology, or the older terminology in the modern sense, the idea of jihad, taking it to the next level. This is also a phase where there were numerous conflicts in different parts. The identities were touched, and identities were also getting involved in a lot of other political happenings, including that of Pakistan, which we will be seeing. Partially, my colleague Dr. Dheeraj touched upon Zia, but I will be dealing in detail, because when it comes to South Asia, their story, or Zia's story, is much more important than we need to remember. So this phase happens between 47 to 89. In which a lot of things happen, including that of the Afghan war, and then the ideology, the problems with the ideology, and then many other states coming in, and then Afghanistan becoming a place of experiment where smaller groups came together to defeat the giant, or a superpower, which gave a different sort of a feeling for most of the smaller organizations as well as individuals, that when you are on a mission, and when the God is on your side, you just don't need to fear whether it is a superpower or anybody. To be precise, even if it is the story of the David and the Goliath probably was much more appreciated here, saying that with the good, the God always stays, and he will see to it that the victory is them. So this, in fact, inspired a lot of organizations which were already troubling India in the South Asian region, with regard to Kashmir, with regard to many other components that were existing. Now, with the 1989 victory that the groups got, the consolidation period started here. You see rise of Osama bin Laden. You also see many others coming into picture. The Taliban got its own shape to consolidate power in Afghanistan. The amalgamation of so many organizations and their allegiance to certain groups, including that of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda almost became like the organization in the world that was representing Islamic Jihad, and the Islamists all were looking up to them. And this is perhaps a period that is much more important for in understanding the Islamic fundamentalism in South Asia. To be precise, with 9/11 happening, and then that again it was seen as a victory for the Islamist groups. Again, waging jihad on a superpower was not far away, and that was led by Osama bin Laden and the group. It is also a time there were other fragmentations. We also saw quite a few leaders falling, including Osama bin Laden. So 2014, it gave rise to some of the splinter groups with taking advantage of the Arab Spring. Numerous groups started coming in, and one such group declared itself to be a caliphate of the modern idea. Nobody ever imagined in 2014 we would have a caliphate based on religious grounds, on extreme ideas, and that exactly happened. Now 2014, with the caliphate emerging, I think it again further consolidated this scenario, and I call this period as the emergence of the imminent, where it gave a futuristic understanding of where it would be heading to. This is precisely when, even from the nook and corner of South Asia, Southeast Asia, to all the places, so I'm restricting myself to South Asia, people started going in, everybody started realizing, or every other group started feeling that they need to be part of this one, if not now, when else? And they also felt this is a golden moment. If they would not take part, they would almost be seen as betrayers, or they would be seen as those who turned their back to the God. And this is the sort of story, these were the type of brainwashes that started happening across the spectrum in South Asia, and a lot of them went and started contributing. If you look at the base and the rationale for the fundamentalism in South Asia, first and foremost was, as I mentioned, through the time period, the pursuit of establishing what we call as the Nizam al-Islami, which was modeled on the Medinian Caliphate, was the idea. I said already the Ottoman collapsed, so there was something else that had to come in here, where other ideologies, other protest ways, or other ways of expressing themselves, let's say the protest ideologies, nationalism, socialism, anti-imperialist, national egalitarian, including the non-aligned. There were so many other things that came to them. Unfortunately, none of them could bring all the people together. None of them could hit the emotions properly. I think it is precisely here when the Islamization part, or fundamentalism, or the Islamic fundamentalism actually started taking root. So the idea was re-Islamization from below. This is how it started. This particular process is facilitated by the fact that Islam, at the level of masses, provided a frame of reference for their collective identity, and a symbol of self-assertion rooted in their traditions itself. Because rest of the things had one or the other way been problematic. Okay, they could use them on certain occasions, but let's say something associated with a communist ideology or socialism, these were problematic because they were seen as anti-religion. There were certain problems that were associated. So somewhere or the other, they had to take on those lines. They also had to differentiate between we and they. And on the other hand, the problems were associated with other important issues of the states being not very, very strong. The states themselves were unable to get hold of their masses. They were not able to convey what exactly the states were supposed to do with regard to governance. So people had to fight their own, or people had to find their own ways of dealing with life. And precisely Islam was, or the conservative component of Islam, or the extreme side of Islam, gave them that particular platform. Now, certainly this was not a homogeneous movement. There's no doubt about it. They share some common denominations as they draw on key assumptions of themes, such as the need for liberating mankind from the state of godless Jahiliyyah, as I mentioned, and the establishing of an Islamic order for the actualization of the Muslim life. Because The religious text also very clearly says who is and who is not. Then the idolaters, those of them who turn back, and who are all these people. Perhaps very, very clear ways of expressing, due to which the interpretations were also easy and the actions added up to it. This was something that was conveyed. Second, the lack of education in many of the states in South Asia with very, very poor infrastructure. People looked up to the mullahs, people looked up to those who were preaching, who took liberty in interpretation, liberty in the way they wanted to push their identity, as well as insert certain extreme radical thoughts in South Asian countries. It is here that the madrasa started playing in. That's where I come to Zia-ul-Haq, the 11 years of the military rule. Perhaps I had given this example. I keep giving this example even in my classes to my students, where we see hardly 800, 850 madrasas that were existing in all over Pakistan during his time, because of the type of support that he started getting from the Gulf countries. It ended up, by the end of his 11 years, it reached closer to 18,000 madrasas. You can imagine the type of education that they imparted. Most of the curriculum was against other religions. Most of the things that were taught to them was to say what makes an individual a good Muslim, rather than that when they were preaching how actually to eliminate those of them who are not Muslims, or how to establish an Islamic rule across the world, and how that is the issue of a life. Now, Deobandi ulama as well as Jamaat-e-Islam guided Zia's this brand of Islamization and became the military's partners in Afghan war. Here, where we see a deadly or a poisonous cocktail between religion and the military coming together, which continues to be the same case even today. That's something that we speak about. This morning we had documentary in my department where some of the students were explaining how a terrorist leader could just stay so close to a military headquarters or a military station. This is precisely because of whatever the foundations that were laid by some of these leaders. The Mullah-military alliance developed to what we see in today's manifestation itself. Now, South Asian states, if you again going further from there, Zia used Islam not simply for the purpose of regime legitimacy, but to neutralize the rising tide of Islamist activism to form what we call as the Order of the Prophet, which is also called as Nizam-e-Mustafa movement in the late 1970s, following up till 1989. That is his term, perhaps the most dangerous term, unfortunate term for South Asian states itself. He co-opted sections of Islamist opposition and isolating others, at the same time blustering state power and capacity itself. On the other hand, we see Zia-ur Rahman not trying to play with it, but at the same time fearing what would happen in that day's East Pakistan and subsequently becoming Bangladesh. We see Zia coming into picture again, and then subsequently the role played by Khaleda Zia, where she came much, much closer to Jamaat-e-Islami and where many other organizations joined hands with Pakistan and started the movement into a different way, almost patronizing most of the terrorist organizations which were into Islamic fundamentalism. Now, because Pakistan and Bangladesh are a known story, and moving further to Sri Lanka, where in Sri Lanka, the Islamic fundamentalism actually started off much, much earlier, though the Muslims went there because of the Portuguese, where they were called as the Moorish, and then they have all these groups, including the Ahmadiyya. They also have certain Indonesian population, but together all of them as a dominant component, they also consolidated themselves as a resistance movement because of the LTT also abusing at some point of time. But it's later stage when they started asserting, they also started getting influenced by radicalization. It is precisely here that the institutions such as Tablighi, many other also started influencing them. ISIS made a very big time inroad. This is something that happened in some of the very, very important provinces, where in a small region of less than 50,000 people staying, they had closer to 85 mosques. In the sense, the identity started becoming so important. On top of it, when the wealth also started adding up, this had gone to a different level, which manifested in what we see as the Easter Day attack. And subsequently, now Sri Lanka has been taking care of it, but yet I think the imminent threat is so strong that the state of Sri Lanka is trembling, and it still hasn't come out of the shock that it went through. But it has its own legacy. It has its own ways of looking at this particular problem in the region. Now, Maldives is torn between, because they move into the fundamentalist side of it. They would want to come back to it. I think it also depends on their political regime. But nevertheless, it's been seen that these days there is huge struggle between the Islamic fundamentalism that's existing in Maldives, and the way state is trying to promote on the one hand and to constrain on the one hand, because politically that is required. But then in terms of longer sustenance and their image across the world, they find it problematic. That's something that I'm trying to leave it there. But there are different type of components that come here, where political violence and security risks are looked at. Jihadism, then Islamism is political activism, security and the public order risks that they look at. Islamic fundamentalism, where non-political activities in the public order is in threat. And then you have the last part. It's not to say that in all these states, all the Muslims, all the groups are into this one, but it is precisely the middle one that we are talking about, which is extremely dangerous, along with the top layer that we see as jihadism. So it starts off from the lower level, where tolerant Islam component is there. Then you have the Islamic fundamentalism, Islamism, and then finally leading to jihadism, which is an extreme form where they would want to eliminate people. These are simple numbers that I'm trying to give to the audience. How much political influence should religious leaders have? It's very, very interesting that you see the states of Bangladesh and Afghanistan, all those places, as well as Pakistan. In all these places, the rating is comparatively very, very high, apart from the West Asian states. Now, who are backing the Sharia law? Because this is also important. If we are moving towards fundamentalism, there has to be certain indicators. If you look at South Asia is stopping in this one. This is precisely why I said the imminent threat, because the direction that in which it is moving, or the direction in which they are anticipating certain states to, that means they're so clear that what they want to bring in is visible in this one, because it's way, way ahead of even, let's say, Middle East and North Africa, who own the whole component of what we call, or what we're discussing here. But South Asia is planning to take over that one. That's an issue of anxiety, but at the same time, numbers speak it all. If we look at, again, the average GTA scores, that is the terrorism index that we look at every year that has been published. Again, here we see South Asia having the highest score, or an overall score at the top, again leading or going beyond all these things because of the presence of Afghanistan. But nevertheless, this is not the trend that we are trying to look at. Attacks, deaths, again here also South Asia, though comparatively in terms of the deaths that we are looking at, it's low because of existence of Syria and Iraq. Apart from that one, South Asia is in second position, and I think perhaps it's also going in a way that can be very, very dangerous. This is a graph that we see from 2002 to 2019, which also speaks volumes about how the fundamentalism or the Islamic fundamentalism is taking shape, where it is leading to the extreme form of jihad. It's leading to the extreme idea of political change that they're anticipating in the region itself, which I just showed with few other examples, with giving the genesis of it and a timeline that probably will give a clear picture for us where South Asia stands with regard to Islamic fundamentalism.